From Classrooms to Careers is presented by the Spring Branch ISD Alumni Foundation. This series is made possible through the generous support of First Community Credit Union.
Welcome to Six Schools, One Legacy, From Classrooms to Careers, where we highlight the stories of exceptional graduates from the six high schools in the Spring Branch Independent School District. Each conversation explores the path from student life to professional life, the lessons, the challenges, and the moments that shape the journey. I'm Paul Marks, a 1976 graduate of Memorial High School in the Spring Branch Independent School District, and I'm your host. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Ambassador Chase Untermeyer, who is a graduate of Memorial High School in 1964. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Paul.
So let's start out a little bit. Tell us about, I know that you were actually born in New Jersey, but moved here at a very early age. Talk a little bit about when you got here, what brought your family here, and where did you live?
My parents came from totally different backgrounds. My father was from New York City. He went to Columbia College, and during World War II, he was an Army officer serving in Washington. My mother came from a tiny town in northwest Alabama. She went to the University of Chicago and was one of the first women naval officers assigned to Washington. So they met there and married. I came along in the immediate post-war period. My father was from New York City, but he never liked it. He really liked the so-called Jersey Shore, that part of New Jersey on the Atlantic right near New York. So we lived in a lovely community called Rumson, which I don't remember because I was only 2 years old when we moved to Texas. We moved to Texas because my grandmother, my father's father, was a classic New York dowager who announced, she didn't ask, she just announced that she would alternate weekends between her son who lived in New Jersey and her daughter who lived on Long Island. That presented certain logistical problems every other weekend. So my mother declared, and I may have been in the room in my playpen at the time, but of course I don't remember, she declared that we had to move out of commuting distance from New York. So she and my father bought a 1948 wood-sided Buick station wagon and made a trip through the Southwest with my grandmother with them, a very smart strategic move. And they went through Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and they decided in 1948 that Houston was the city of the future. So preparations were made. My father had worked for Macy's, the great New York department store. So through New York and other department store connections, he got a job at Foley's, which was the great Houston department store. And that's what brought us to Houston in 1948. We lived in rental housing for the first 2 or 3 years because there was a housing shortage in Houston in the years right after World War II. And the first house that my parents could find to buy was in the Memorial Drive area, a street only a mile or so west of what was then called Post Oak Road and is today Loop 610. And that's why in the fall of 1951, when I was 5, I started out my Spring Branch career at Memorial Drive Elementary School.
Okay. All right. And then anything you remember specifically about the school?
It was, of course, the dawn of memory for me. I remember liking school, and we had wonderful teachers. That's a common thing for people of my age and generation, which was we were the great beneficiaries of the fact that American women didn't have many career opportunities those days beyond teaching and secretarial work, perhaps assistant work in medical professions. And as such, we had the benefit of some very able, very well-educated, and truly inspiring teachers. That was true throughout my educational career.
And then from Memorial Drive Elementary, where did you go there next?
Yes, the Hunters Creek Elementary opened in the fall of 1953. So without moving from our house, just started in at that school. and it's always new and brave to start off a school, which I got to do later when Memorial High School was created. In any event, Hunters Creek was closer, a little bit closer than Memorial Drive, and that's where things started to accelerate.
And then you went to junior high. I don't think Memorial Junior High was around at that time.
It wasn't, but there was a step in between, and
Okay.
that is my parents built a house farther out of Memorial, and when we moved there in the fall of 1957, then I spent 1 year at Bunker Hill Elementary School.
Okay. All right.
My sisters, who were younger, went to 1 or 2 more, brand new Spring Branch schools, because the district was growing so fast, but I finished my elementary schooling at Bunker Hill.
So you made the rounds of almost all the elementary schools of the district, basically, at that
Pretty
time.
much.
Yeah. And so junior high, where did you end up going?
Yes, it was Spring Branch Junior High, which at the time was the only one other than Landrum Junior High. And I was at Spring Branch Junior High for all 3 years. That is, during the seventh, eighth, and ninth grades.
And so you ended up getting interested in anything because that transition from elementary school to junior high, that's when they start getting serious about certain classes and opportunities for different clubs and organizations and things like that. Was that anything there that caught your interest?
Well, the confession is that I was a very active student politician.
Mm,
I'd become interested in government history, politics, through reading, starting pretty young, like about age 8. I adopted Theodore Roosevelt as my boyhood idol, and he's a good one. So I commend the 8-year-old me on a good choice. But uh, simplicity being the thing that appeals most to 8-year-olds, I recognize that Theodore Roosevelt did all these amazing things because he was in politics. So I became interested in politics, and that meant doing the kind of politics that elementary school students do, which is to be class president. And later, when I went to junior high school, I was elected to the student council. And for the rest of my junior and senior high school years, I was in and out of the student council in various positions. And that helped propel me, you could say, on a political career in real time.
yeah, that's great. So as you finished up at Spring Branch Junior High, you go to Memorial High School. How was that transition for you?
Actually, there
Oh,
was one in between, and that is
really?
I have the brag that I went to Spring Branch High School. The last year, it was the only high school in the Spring Branch district, which was 1961-62.
Okay.
And I enjoyed that experience quite a lot. But Memorial High School was created, and we were in that zone. Starting in the fall of my junior year, which would be fall of 1962, I went to Memorial and graduated from there.
And some of the things that you were interested in that helped you maybe kind of solidify your political, I mean, besides the student councils, were you involved in any other organizations or clubs that, where you were able to get kind of that background?
Uh, the biggest activity, other than student council, any event, the main activity was speech and debate.
Yes.
In Spring Branch Junior High School, I had the wonderful speech and debate coach, Sherry Billing, who was such an inspiration and such a delightful character. She helped uh, get us all involved in those activities in the junior high level. And then when I went to high school, first Spring Branch, then Memorial, the speech and debate coach was Rex Fleming, another interesting, lively character, and that was very helpful. I didn't like debate as such. I did very much like what was called extemp, or extemporaneous speaking, in which
Mhm.
contestants drew topics and, with a little bit of preparation, then gave a talk on that subject. And that was very valuable throughout life and career because that's much more attuned to what people in public offices have to do as opposed to debate, which was very formal, very stylized, very repetitive. And frankly, I just got tired of it and much preferred the livelier speaking opportunities. So those two, student council work and speech and debate, were my main activities during junior and senior high school.
And do you have any specific memories or stories of things that happened while you were at Memorial or Spring Branch High School that kind of you'd like to share with our audience?
Yes, this may not be the answer you're seeking because it was outside of class, but in the spring of 1961, which was in my ninth grade year, the final year at Spring Branch Junior High School, I volunteered in in a real campaign, and this was the special election for the United States Senate, which was held in the spring of 61. Lyndon Johnson had resigned his seat in the Senate to become John F. Kennedy's vice president. There was a special election in Texas. And in those days, the tiny, aspiring Republican Party depended pretty much on two labor forces. One were homemakers, and the other were teenagers. So, as a teenage volunteer in that campaign, I rang doorbells and made phone calls and otherwise did the kind of grassroots political work that I would do for myself many years later. It was a historic election. John Tower was elected. He was the first Republican elected statewide in Texas. He was, in fact, the only Republican senator from the entire Confederacy, former Confederacy, which is in contrast to today when pretty much every senator from the South is a Republican. But those were very early days, and I count myself, even though it was a small bit of volunteering and a very low level of political activity, nevertheless, I was on the scene for a truly turning point in Texas politics.
And so, as you were approaching, I guess, the end of your high school term, either early in your senior year or maybe in your junior year, you were starting to think about where you were going to go next, colleges and so forth. I know you ended up attending and graduating from Harvard, but how was that experience as far as deciding where to go and applying to different colleges?
Once again, Theodore Roosevelt was my guide,
Hmm.
and the 8-year-old me saw that he had gone to Harvard, so I decided that's where I want to go because my man went there. Later, meaning as I got older and junior and senior high school, and my interest in government politics, international relations matured, I realized that Harvard was a pretty smart choice for studying those kinds of things. It was also the dawn of the Kennedy administration, John F. Kennedy being elected president in my ninth grade year, final year at Spring Branch Junior High School. And he brought a lot of Harvard people into government with him. He was a Harvard graduate himself. So this just seemed to be proof that that was the place to go. I wasn't exaggerating because in those years, there were very few, mostly high level private universities that offered the quality of study and libraries and speakers and professors that Harvard and other Ivy League schools did. There weren't many anywhere else in the country, and I dare say not here in Texas. When I speak to students today, I say that they have a luxury of choice that didn't exist in my time.
Hmm.
Just in Texas, we have the Bush School at Texas A&M. There's the LBJ School at the University of Texas. There's the Hobby School at the University of Houston. There's the George W. Bush Institute at SMU. There's even the Kay Bailey Hutchison Center at Angelo State. So students in Texas today who are interested in the same things I were at that age have a great deal of choice. They don't have to go to the frozen East like I did in order to study those things.
So You went to Harvard. Any exciting stories there that you want to discuss with us before we get to your naval career?
Well, once again, it was off campus that proved to be much more interesting and involved. In the summer between my sophomore and junior years at Harvard, I volunteered in the congressional campaign of a Houston oil man named George Bush. This was George H.W. Bush. And I did campaign volunteer work, mostly in the headquarters, but I came to his attention, and uh, that began a 52-year relationship that, in more immediate terms, after he was elected to Congress that year, 1966, he invited me to be an intern on his Washington staff the following summer. I also went down to Washington whenever I could from college, like during semester break or spring break, to work in his congressional office. And that began a relationship that in later years opened many a door in my uh, ability to reach those levels of government that I had read about as a student.
And so then, after you graduated Harvard, you ended up becoming an officer in the Navy. This was during the Vietnam War. Is that correct?
Yes, and practically every male student in my age cohort was totally torn up, aggravated, worried about the draft and
Mm.
whether they would be involuntarily sent into uniform. Uh, I did not want to uh, torment myself with such thinking, so I took advantage of an opportunity to join the Naval ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps, also in the summer between my sophomore and junior years. That enabled me to be commissioned as an officer in the Navy, the lowest possible rank, an ensign, upon graduation in 1968. Um, Unlike many of my cohort, I wanted to be in uniform. I wanted to have the further adventure and travel that came from military service, which in my case did in fact happen. And I also felt that since I wanted to go into politics, that having a military record was very, very useful. After all, the World War II generation was running America at the time, and it seemed to me that my generation would uh, also value people who had military experience. Now, it turned out, given that Vietnam was quite a different kind of conflict from the Second World War, that that wasn't necessarily the case. My generation's president, Bill Clinton, was a draft dodger. He managed to get elected in very conservative, pro-military Arkansas without having served in uniform, in fact, being contemptuous of people in the military. So I made a political miscalculation, but I found that serving in uniform, learning about the nation's Navy and going to various places, mostly East Asia, was very valuable when in later years I got to Washington and had a chance to be at senior levels in the Navy Department.
So let's talk about after your time in the Navy. You came back to Houston.
With a break, I was assigned in the second of my two military duties and then on active duty to the Philippines. And that was a wonderful place to be. I enjoyed traveling around that country, but I also saw it as a wonderful jumping off place to travel elsewhere in Asia and eventually Africa that would not come again in my lifetime. So I spent 16 months between active duty naval service and returning to Houston, traveling on my own through Asia and Africa. A fantastic experience with many as an adventure on that particular trek. But that I recognized was a rare moment in life when I could take 16 months and do that kind of thing. Today, taking 16 days to travel seems too long.
Exactly, exactly. And then when you were finished with your traveling, you came back to Houston.
Yes, and I needed to get a job. I was interested at that point in moving toward an active career in politics. I had been away from Houston since graduating from high school in 1964. That was 7 years earlier. And how much does a high school student really know about a big city like Houston? So, for me, the solution to both my employment and preparation issues was to be a newspaper reporter. I had never worked in journalism. I had not worked on the Memorial High School paper. I had not worked for the college newspaper. I, Nevertheless, I did send some travel stories from the road in Asia and Africa back to the Houston Chronicle. So I had, in effect, a portfolio of articles that they had already published of mine. And fortunately, I arrived right at a time that they had let go several of their staff and needed to fill the newsroom back. So they hired me, and that proved to be a wonderful experience of not only performing as a journalist, but getting to know the state of Texas better, getting to know the city of Houston better, becoming known by people in public office, and that definitely helped boost me toward what I was really aiming toward, a more active career in politics.
And you were a political reporter for the Chronicle,
That's
so you
correct.
got to cover things not only locally in Houston, but across the state and the state capital and so forth.
Yes, I was never a member of the Capitol Bureau. I wanted to be. I've often thought that if I had been assigned to the Chronicle Austin Bureau and covered a session of the legislature, I might never have run for the legislature. I might have uh, run in horror away from being part of that operation, but I was spared that bit of education. What specifically led from being a excuse me, from being a journalist to being an active politician was that I got to know a man who was elected the first Republican county judge of Harris County, John Lindsay, and he hired me to be his executive assistant. I left the paper and spent a year and a half in the Harris County courthouse working for the brand new county judge, a wonderful experience with a wonderful man. And that led to my being elected to a very good Republican seat in the Texas House of Representatives. That was in the year 1976 when I was 30.
Where was the district that you were elected in Houston?
It was a compote of neighborhoods on the west side of downtown Houston. So, very high income areas, River Oaks, Tanglewood,
Ah,
Eastern
okay.
Memorial Drive, but also some very middle income areas in Eastern Spring Branch, and then some low income areas around St. Thomas High School. I might add that the areas of Spring Branch that I covered in my legislative district included the very precinct where I had campaigned for John Tower in 1961. So it was, you might say, familiar territory.
Yeah, full circle there.
And the
Uh,
fact that I had gone to the Spring Branch schools from kindergarten through high school was a definite plus in seeking election in that end of the city.
okay, that's great. So then you left there, the legislator, resigned your term because you got into more of a national political spectrum. Talk about that.
Yes, I mentioned becoming affiliated with the late wonderful George Bush the elder early on as a college student. Well, I maintained relations, which was no great problem because the Bushes themselves liked to maintain relations with everybody they'd ever met. So that when George Bush was elected vice president with Ronald Reagan in 1980, he invited me to join his staff in the West Wing of the White House. That was exactly the place I had daydreamed of going, and it was therefore not a great leap. Well, it was a big leap geographically, but from a political point of view, not difficult at all to give up my seat in the Texas legislature and go to Washington. A very exciting time at the start of the Reagan administration, and I would be there for the duration of the next 12 years that Reagan and then Bush elder were in the White House.
And you ended up going from that position, you were to back to the, Navy again.
Yes, my job with Vice President Bush was undoubtedly glamorous. For one thing, I was there in the heart of everything, the West Wing of the White House, just a few steps from the Oval Office and the Chief of Staff's office, etc. And we traveled throughout America and the world. I got to meet all sorts of notable people and could drop names like having dinner at number 10 Downing Street with Margaret Thatcher, or having a private audience with Pope, now Saint John Paul II, of having lunch in the Imperial Palace with Emperor Hirohito in Tokyo. Those were monumental experiences of the sort that a state legislator might daydream of during a boring debate, and I got to do them. But as wonderful as they had no substance. They were staff work. They were just being there on call. And I realized that if I wanted to learn how U.S. government really works, I had to leave the golden cocoon of the White House and go into one of the departments and agencies, which is where the real governing is done. And I wanted to go to the Navy Department because of past connection with the Navy, but also in the Reagan administration, the Navy was the leading edge of a major defense buildup under the leadership of a most remarkable, dynamic fellow named John Lehman, who was the Secretary of the Navy. So I used my political connections once again to be selected for political appointment at the Navy Department. And the next year, President Reagan appointed me Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, which was the people job for the Navy and Marine Corps, and about 250,000 civilian workers as well. So that was a absolute fulfillment of what I wanted to get, and I felt did get, by seeing American government from the inside, in a very exciting place.
And from that point, George H.W. Bush was elected president, and you changed positions again, working with him again.
Yes, the morning after his election, he held a press conference here in Houston and made 3 personnel announcements, the very first announcements of his administration. One was of our fellow Houstonian James Baker to be Secretary of State. Another was of Boyden Gray, who had been his lawyer in the vice presidency, to be the White House counsel, which is to say the president's lawyer. And the third was me, to be the personnel director, which is a major responsibility, particularly at the start of a presidential administration. A fascinating, valuable experience, but also a rather difficult one. And I did that for the next 2.5 years. It was the job that advises the president on all the appointments to office that a president gets to make: cabinet, sub-cabinet, regulatory commissioners, ambassadors, judgeships, advisory boards of one kind or another. It was the ultimate graduate course in American government because we dealt with every corner of the American government.
And you did that, and then ultimately, after George Bush left office, and Bill Clinton came in,
Well,
did you
there
come back
was
to Houston, or you got something else you want?
Yes, toward the end of the first Bush administration, after those 2 years, 2.5 years of doing important but also very difficult work as personnel director, I realized once again that if I wanted to actually know how American government works, I needed to leave the White House and take over a department and agency of my own.
Okay.
Well, we had been so efficient in my hardworking staff that there weren't many open positions, but one of them was to be the director of the Voice of America, which is the international broadcasting arm of the U.S. government, unfortunately devastated in the current administration at great loss to the United States, but that's the subject of another discussion. The Voice of America broadcast in 50 foreign languages, 1,000 hours of broadcasts every week. It had correspondents around the globe. It had transmitting facilities around the globe. It was therefore an opportunity for me, with an interest in international relations, to operate at that scene. And I did that until the tragic defeat for reelection of my boss, President Bush. And when he lost his job, so did I. And both of us did the right thing, which was to go home after we were relieved of our governmental duties.
And so when you got back to Houston, what path did you go down there?
Um, it took a while, but I was hired by the late Compact Computer Corporation to do government relations work for them. And I concentrated on the state and local government, occasionally helping the staff in Washington when I could help them. But that was what I did for 8 years. But the fact is that I did a lot of important things on the outside uh, in a governmental capacity, part-time and unpaid. So I was appointed by the Harris County Commissioners Court to the Houston Port Commission, which operates the public docks and facilities of the nation's second largest port, which greatly appealed to me with my maritime interests. And then when George W. Bush became governor, he asked me to become the chairman of the State Board of Education, which
Wow.
was a very difficult position, the difficulty rising to the same level of what I had experienced as the personnel director in the White House. But it was a great learning experience. It was a chance to help keep his record of achievement in public education from being tossed aside by some antithetical elements. Later, I felt that when I was appointed by him when he was president as an ambassador, it was as much as anything a reward for my service 4 years on the State Board of Education.
Yeah, and let's talk if you're ready, let's talk a little bit about that when you were appointed to be an ambassador.
Yes, well, it was a surprise. For one thing, about 3 years of the Bush administration, the second Bush administration, had passed. I had wanted to be Secretary of the Navy in that administration, but that was not to be. And when it became clear that it was not going to be, after all, I'd been the personnel director. I'd seen many a hope dashed by people who wanted an appointment of some kind or another. So I figured I could take it if they could take it. And I returned to doing my work, part-time work in government and work for Compaq, and later in the Texas Medical Center. So it was a surprise in March of 2004 when I picked up a phone call that it was the lady who was serving in my old job as the White House personnel director asking me if I would be interested in becoming an ambassador. Well, that was an easy question to answer because I felt that my whole life and career, in every dimension that we've discussed, was leading toward being able to represent the president overseas. The country that I was asked to go to, Qatar in the Persian Gulf, was a very exciting place to be, but it was a place I had no prior knowledge or connection. I did not speak Arabic. I had not traveled to that country or in the Persian Gulf region. It was um, a, semi-familiar at best culture, the Arab culture, and it was therefore a learning experience, not just for me, but for my wife and daughter when we arrived there the following August. And thanks to the people of Qatar, who were very warm, welcoming, tolerant, and helpful, we learned the Arab culture and so much of how to live in that part of the world, thanks to them.
Hmm. And once that was over, you came back to Houston again?
Yes, and I like to point that out, that points to the fact that I do feel very committed to Houston. It's a wonderful city
Absolutely.
to be in any capacity, public, private, and it's a city that is always concerned about the present and the future, not the past. Many, especially East Coast cities, are consumed with the past, and that is not the Houston way. So while my fellow Houstonians were very delighted that I had a career in government leading to an ambassadorship, they and I were interested more of what we're doing now or what's going to happen in the future. That's a very classic Houston and generally Texan view of life. So I became a consultant dealing with companies that were interested in business in Qatar. But I also did, once again, a final round of government service in that the Speaker of the Texas House of Representatives, Joe Strauss, appointed me to the Texas Ethics Commission, which is the body in state government that regulates campaign spending and lobbying. I served a full 8 years on the Ethics Commission, and that brought to an end my string of government offices, full-time, part-time, elected, appointed, paid, unpaid, uh, and all those other dimensions.
You've also fallen back to your writing days with the Chronicle, where you published some books.
Yes, well, since the age of 9, I have been a diarist. That
Hmm.
is, I have that strange quirk that at the end of every day, I sit down at the desk and record what I did that day. So that was going to happen in my life, regardless of where my life led me. So, in the years after coming back from Qatar, I took the journals that I had written during the days of the Reagan-Bush administration in Washington and selected certain passages and incidents and anecdotes that I thought would be very interesting and instructive to give a feeling of not just the history of those days, but also what it felt like to be in Washington during the Reagan years and the Bush years. That became 3 volumes of diary-based memoirs that the Texas A&M University Press kindly published. And currently in the works is a 4th volume, very similar format of my time as ambassador in Qatar.
You also published a book titled "How Important People Act: Behaving Yourself in Public." That seems very appropriate for today's time. If there, I mean, I have not had the opportunity to read the book, but just from the title, it's intriguing.
What it is a compendium of techniques, do's and don'ts, tricks of the trade, you might say, that come from living a public life. Not just what I myself learned worked and didn't work, but observing others. So that these are very practical things about being in public, like which side do you wear the name tag, and in which hand do you hold the cold, wet glass? And if you're sitting on stage, um, not to cross your legs and to look at the person who's talking. All these are very practical techniques that I find work in a public life, and they work in private life as well, meaning a corporate existence. And I put them all together, and a local publisher here in Houston put it together. It was a very successful book. It sold out, and then the publisher went out of business. So I have written a rare book.
Well, I'm sure we could talk more and more about all the things that you've done and that you've experienced, but we do have to close it out. And I want to ask you this question: if a current student within the Spring Branch School District is watching this interview, what type of advice can you give them on how to consider where they are and what they should think about for their future?
Well, let me approach that from 2 levels. One is generally, and that is that these are important years for working hard. Yes, there's so many distractions, both social media and personal, that people who are in their teenage years are subject to. But there's nothing more important than doing the work of education, of getting the best possible grades that you can during that time, because they are going to be part of the permanent record, and that will determine quite a lot of the next phase of life. I hate to say that education should be considered a job, but just like a job, it should be approached seriously and not frivolously. So do the work and do as well as possible. For somebody who might be afflicted with the same strange virus that I was and be interested in government and politics, I would say to do two things. One is to work in a political campaign, and the other is to take internships whenever they present themselves. That's more likely at the college level than at the high school level, but it's all part of the same thing, which is to see how government politics works from the inside and making contacts. You can never know enough people in public life. And working in a campaign, even if it's a losing campaign, is a great place to meet people.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Untermeyer, for uh, speaking with us today and for reminding us how powerful the journey from classrooms to careers can be. And I want to thank our audience for spending time with us. We encourage you to continue watching as we share more stories from the remarkable graduates of the Spring Branch Independent School District, because every legacy begins somewhere. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul.
This has been From Classrooms to Careers, presented by the Spring Branch ISD Alumni Foundation, made possible by the generous support of First Community Credit Union.